Hey everyone, we're grateful for your support and hope our podcast has been helpful in both your personal and professional journey. We've added new continuing education webinars to our website. And as you renew your license, head over and check out our available courses. We'll be adding even more in the future, so stay tuned. And now, without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Are you tired of the same old therapy approaches being taught and delivered? Like the current strategies just doesn't resonate with everyone, including the therapists who are delivering the treatments. For many therapists of color, often we are screaming for freedom within the context of how to go about delivering evidence-based treatments. And how might we do that in a space where we must acknowledge our own intersectional identities and interests? Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Zen. Today we are joined by Dr. Medina, a licensed psychologist in California specializing in helping adults overcome anxiety disorders such as social anxiety, phobias, and panic disorder, and the co-occurrence of substance use disorders. Additionally, Dr. Medina has had extensive training in PTSD research and treatment. In the area of PTSD, Dr. Medina's unique focus has been on issues that disproportionately impact women, such as sexual assault and the experiences of BIPOC minorities. Dr. Medina provides evidence-based therapies, particularly process-based cognitive behavior therapies, values-based exposure therapies, and ACT as part of her holistic clinical approach, where she provides a safe, encouraging, and identity-affirming space for change to happen on the client's terms, guided by their personal values. And prior to her transitioning to private practice, Dr. Medina was a postdoctoral fellow at the Stanford University School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, and developed a clinical research program focused on yoga and mind-body intervention science. She has co-authored 14 peer-reviewed journal articles and delivered over 30 presentations at national psychology conferences. As a Latina, Mexican-American psychologist, Dr. Medina will be discussing the importance of how diversity is essential to filling in the gaps in our field, in which our diversity can be the passion, innovation, and cultural wisdom to reshape how we participate in psychological treatment for our clients. Dr. Medina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about your origin story? Share with me specific memories that may have influenced how you got to where you are today.
I was noticing when I was looking at my history and background and trying to create what narrative made sense for this venue, that we have different versions of our stories, right? There's a success story, and then there's also a struggle story, and there's also a way that we learn to sort of mold for the context. And I just want to name that this is one of the first times I've been trying to just kind of say it like it was, I grew up in a suburb of Los Angeles, in sort of a middle-class suburb, as a fourth-generation Mexican kid. And interestingly enough, both of my parents were one of two or maybe three Mexican families that even own businesses and property in the Woodland Hills, California subset of the Valley. And so they found each other, they got married, they had us, me and my brother. And so I was sort of like a middle-class suburb, but we had one of the best USD public school funding sources. We were a well-funded school, we had good resources. I had good mentors, teachers, kind of college counseling resources as I prepared for college apps, but I definitely still felt a sense that I was othered, like I was in Girl Scouts and I'd have a lot of my friends were white, or a few Asian minorities, but mainly white or white Jewish friends in Girl Scouts. And there were microaggressions that were happening to me ever since I could remember. And I don't know, something you just shove away and try to assimilate, because neither of my parents speak Spanish, and my grandparents didn't, each of them on both sides didn't teach them Spanish, to try to push this assimilation, because what they went through with prejudice and discrimination, especially in the 30s and the Great Depression. And so there was this sort of like older generation mindset of like, you're fine, and no one kind of prepared me for like, oh, randomly you will feel shame at school for no reason, even though you also got an A+ on the quiz. Or when you get into Stanford, all the people you thought were your friends in your AP classes say it's probably because they wanted someone Mexican at Stanford, or because you were good at, I was good at art. So I also thought school was fun, though. Like there was this piece of me, like I said, the success story versus the struggle story. Like there was a part of me that just like loved learning, like always been curious. I would get in trouble for talking too much. Jokes on them. I'm now taught for a living. Like in gymnastics or at school, it's like kind of like, oh, like, but stop talking, or don't question everything. Like I always be like, why is this, why is that, worked well for mechanisms-based research that I ended up doing. But so there's a part of me that always just like, regardless of whatever social crap thrown my way, I never had sort of an imposter syndrome about academics and school and learning, because I just love learning. So that's sort of my, I guess, origin story of how I was a strong performer, but also felt very othered, and then had some microaggressive kind of othering from peers that were supposed to be my friends, or supposed to be my colleagues, or supposed to be, and that just kept happening. Moved somewhere from California, which is actually pretty diverse. I did have more diverse interactions. Like in the Valley, San Fernando Valley, it's rich, culturally diverse. Like in the same, neighborhood, there are different cultures, different any ethnic cuisine you want. And so it's not like a super siloed suburb or anything. Pretty metropolitan, dense area. But then going to places like, Stanford undergrad, it felt very much like I didn't fit the stereotype of a Chicana. There was a Chicana center. I didn't quite fit in there. But then I'd never even seen the kind of privilege and legacy scholarship there was. I'd never even known people like that exist, really, the privilege there, and certainly didn't really fit in that box. And so kind of moved through. I always kind of like found friends and found things to do, but never really kind of found my people at Stanford undergrad. And it was kind of that, again, experience of like, I'm measuring up, but why don't I fit in? Like, it's not, something else is going on. And I didn't have a lot of identity, race-based identity exploration, or we weren't really talking about these things at that time. So I didn't really put it together. In the felt sense I did, but I didn't really kind of quite put it together. And then go somewhere like Texas for grad school, and it's very, very, very homogeneous, very white dominated. It is like, I'm different either socioeconomically, but then during the diversity course, they'd ask me like, well, what do you have to say? I'm like, I don't represent. And also I'm not very stereotypical. So there was something of like, well, how did you come out of poverty? I'm like, well, I'm not from it. Like there's this stereotype I was supposed to fit and measure up to, or gratify, some of my.
Well, just asking those questions makes you feel othered.
Yeah. And like, I'm supposed to kind of have this prepared answer to represent either the stereotype or the success story breaking out of that. So that was more of my time in Texas. And then just a lot of kind of interdepartmental, interlaboratory politics in my research career that won't get into too much, but it was definitely, I was the only minority in my lab. I was the only person with ADHD, as far as I know. I was the only person to kind of have a style of communication that was more assertive and direct. And I just struggled a lot with being scapegoated and being treated like there was something people had to deal with about me. And I also was a powerhouse, published. God was the only one in my lab that got a F-31 grant from the NIH to do my dissertation research. And so again, there's this mixed story going on at each chapter.
NIH grant at dissertation level? My gosh. Of course, there's that success, which is very incongruent with the socialization process that you went through. What's happening? Yeah. You would expect that, hey, if I am performing, that the rest should come.
Yeah, totally. And that's what we're sold, I think, in society.
Yes. Yeah. Now, I think, part of this platform today too is your message of the importance of how diversity is essential to filling in the gaps of our field. And you really share that because as you were sharing your story, a thought came to me. It's this phrase of the only one that just keeps coming up. And that only one in your environment does speak to diversity, but there are many other only ones. So I'm actually curious about just your message here. Can you share with me, this message of importance of how diversity is essential to our field and bringing the idea of passion and innovation and also your important word, cultural wisdom to reshape our psychological treatment?
Yeah, I think there's an empirical story here. The research is showing who we're not serving, who is not even attracted. And I think that's even, if I was still in academia, I would look at who doesn't want us, to be helping as psychology is a field. And obviously it's coming from a Western science perspective, our field, we recognize that, but there's clear data even to suggest this, that people who drop out or people who don't want to access or aren't benefiting as much may contain some of these individual differences. And the statistics look at our individual differences kind of as error, versus we need to start stepping into first addressing our individual differences and then looking at anything else as error. Kind of the reverse. I heard Steve Pace, who's the creator of ACT, kind of speaking to this on a podcast recently, and it was really, really cool. So I'm not stealing his idea, but just was trying to translate that into a race and cultural adaptation context. I think that there's ways that I manage my own diversity as mirroring how others were, sort of like dealing with myself. And I know you were my practicum supervisor at the time of one of my trainings in Texas. And I just remember trying to okay, he's not going to find out that I'm scattered, or trying to make sure you don't notice that when I dropped the ball and I said I'd do something. And so there was a way I was even managing my own gifts that actually I was noticing wow, this makes me really creative. In our practicum seminar, someone would ask a question because they couldn't break out of the rigidity of what the protocol was meant for. And I'd be like, yeah, but then you do this and this and this. And then people would be like, how'd you think of that? And I'm sure that's part of the way my neurodivergent brain works. I'm full of ideas. I just can't always figure out which ones are worth saying or worth importance, sift through them. But
importance by whose eyes, right?
I guess organizing you can't do them all, organizing my time or not taking too much space in the room, things like that, where I just have so many ideas and so much to say, and you can't, there's only 24 hours a day anyway. But kind of lost my train of thought, but coming back to my original point, the way I learned to manage it, that would be an example. And then I remember you were one of the first, maybe the first person when I was by the way, I have some attention issues and I dropped the ball on an email or something like that. And then you asked me, how can I support you? And I literally didn't know, because I'd never been asked that. I've been treating my own stuff or the way I'm more expressive and less, kind of polite mild mannered, the kind of white Southern culture in Texas that was there didn't match that either. And so I was trying to kind of mask and manage. And then when you asked me, how can I support you? I don't even remember what I said, but I probably made something up on the spot. But I remember viscerally that I was I have no freaking clue. I don't know. Is this something that can be supported, not sort of a cause for, someone just dealing with it or I'll get in trouble or there's something that is inconvenient, inconveniencing others about it. So breaking genuinely kind of coming into my own over time, especially after kind of going out on my own in private practice and running things in ways that work for me, and also working with so many more diverse, racially, ethnically diverse clients and having deep and thoughtful and beautiful conversations about our racialized experiences. I see this is an asset, and me, I always thought I didn't fit the stereotype of the LA Mexican, but I also didn't fit with the white people, and then realized that doesn't mean I don't fit. Actually, a fourth generation Mexican American in LA is a unique identity. There's just not a lot of us, in this area, at least. And so actually I have my families have carved, an identity for us. And that is where I fit. We create is sort of a category. So, maybe it's the difference between someone looking for a therapist and they see someone that looks like them, or someone that has a similar, they're not first gen, they're third gen or second gen, and we have commonality, and we can have these rich conversations together that maybe wouldn't have been happened. Or maybe I can notice something. I see a lot of perfectionism and anxious kind of people. And for some of my minority clients, this underlying that, like, yeah, you can throw CBT at it, skills, balanced thinking, reframing, but underlying a lot of the perfectionism is a similar story to mine, is like, we've been going at our differences this way. And there's something really tender and kind of spiky under there that needs some time, needs some space, needs some nurturance and
Yes.
slowness. And the CBT interventions just to be more liberating and free with your time and set the boundaries are just not going to do it. And so I see that many ways our diversity of what we bring to the room with clients, what we bring to the room with the ways we adapt treatments, and then just our personalities and cultures that bleed personality into the work of protocols and techniques is essential.
I love the way you're describing this piece where, hey, even fourth generation Latina culture is in itself an experience. I think part of racism is to omit that and say, well, you're either Latinx or you're white, or you've assimilated, if you will.
As a
And
success, or either preserve your culture or you assimilate. Yeah, the dichotomy.
assimilate. As you're talking about this, I can share with you how it brought up a memory, and that was growing up. There were a series of experiences in which I have internalized racist ideas. I remember as early as middle school telling my parents that as long as I adopted the American way, that things would be okay. The reality was that it didn't serve me well at all, and just kind of,
It's on paper, it seems reasonable, but it's not. And then, yeah, you live it out, and it's like, yeah, it never works. It's not going to work, and it's not even what's going to be healthy and healing.
Yeah. So it's so powerful that you're doing this type of work, and I love that you've also incorporated your passions. Like putting yoga and mind-body intervention as part of science, exercise, movement, your gymnast identity. What would I say? You're also a gymnast. And so I know you also do a lot of work with chronic pain interventions. And so I think it's great that you really reshaped how you are doing psychotherapy. And I think you have some messages related to that.
Yeah. I think I kind of, without stating, kind of covered some of them, just around the way that my journey showed me that these things were not hindrances. And even if they were hindrances, they're reality. That you can't hide reality. You can't take away you wouldn't want to take away your identity, because that's inherently what it is. So it's not workable, first of all, as we've named. But I want people to know, students, junior faculty, people starting out, people in a racist environment or psychologically unsafe space, that I get it, how it's easy to be like, maybe this isn't the field for me, or we have too much work to go to make it an equitous society, equitous field, equitous all practices. But we need you, and we need all types of diversity. And like I said, you could be the difference between someone seeking help and not just because they see your website and they see someone that looks like them, or someone that sounds like them, or someone that laughs like them. And this is how we make change gradually. And also, I think that I don't want to make a polarized hero story, but I do think I was kind of a regular kid who was hardworking and had some areas of underprivileged, some areas of privilege mixed in there. I represent sort of kind of a regular story of someone just working really hard and following their passion. And even with the adversity and things that othered me and came my way socially, with social pain there, there's a success story that I want to solidify, and I got through it, and you can get through it too. And we can hopefully be more kind. I think there's ways I wish I would have been much more kind to myself and much more seeking of resources for kind of processing some of my racialized experiences. So message is also, we need you. You can get through it, but also seek support, seek out resources there for you. It's not a source of shame to seek out like writing tutors or, disability services for ADHD. I kind of wish I did that sometimes. I didn't. And I think that the shame kind of kept me from seeking out resources. And like we said, going about it like forcing and effort and forcing isn't really the best way. And it has to be a mix of effort, self-compassion, and resourcefulness. And also, if your colleagues have something you want, whether they're of your identity or different, learn, maybe we can help each other, especially as BIPOC people. I actually do remember how organized you were and how much you were so good at pausing sessions with our veteran clients, and I remember like, wow, he's like, because sometimes the sessions, it's hard to kind of, there's so much to unpack in some stories of our clients. And I just remember you had a very keen way of kind of transitioning. And so things like that, where if we notice something we don't have that BIPOC colleague has, ask them how they manage that. Ask them is that a skill they gain? Is that something they have naturally? And let's just help each other out and give each other the gifts of each of our strengths.
Yeah. Dr. Medina, thanks for sharing that. Also, thanks for the feedback. And I think as many immigrants as well as, I'm an immigrant, you're not an immigrant, but sort of the immigrant story is that we have to work hard. And also sort of the minoritized, racialized experiences, you're forced to have to work hard, twice as hard because of the inequities. And, kind of being at the margins where you don't have the resources available, or we don't feel like we quite belong. I think it's so important nowadays to seek that support out where we don't feel we're burdening, we have the weight of the world on our shoulders, which is something, you've talked about, as well as, myself having experienced some of that. So in thinking about your up to now today, what does it mean to be a Latina Mexican-American psychologist?
Yeah. And like I said, to me, it means I think I get to embody incorporating the knowledge and the skills that weren't necessarily designed for me to have and know. From my training, I went through a very traditional academic training and clinical training path and career route in terms of academic science, and especially on the research side, the academic science side. And yet I'm not a very traditional person, or the person that kind of these training programs where it was the more dissertation heavy, publication heavy kind of psychology programs were meant for kind of people like me to succeed. I had to have little side gigs and jobs, even though we weren't supposed to. But I'm sorry, but if I can't pay my rent or have groceries, then that's what had to happen. And I just think that as a BIPOC psychologist, this is more maybe kind of socioeconomic disparity based, but it means that I get to now, in finishing all those hoops, as all the hoops we had to jump to get PhD, dissertation, licensure, practicums, internships, right? Like after finishing all those hoops, now I get to do what I want. Really, I get to do what I want. I get to see who I want in my clients. I get to say what I want, hopefully not put my foot in my mouth too much, but I get to joke and laugh in my sessions. I get to have rich and meaningful connections with clients. I get to watch them grow and change and work for myself with flexibility in my schedule. And I think that that's something essential for a lot of BIPOC people, is to want to have that freedom from institutions and flexibility. I'm still under institutions in general in society. Like I have a real formalized business, but it's not as much scheduled out. And it's not so much that I have a supervisor that I report to that's not from my background anymore. And I think I just have lived out the vision that I want and built the life I want which is an embodiment of BIPOC freedom, BIPOC growth. And I think that it also means that in my work with a lot of busy professionals, I work with a lot of people in tech from the Bay Area, a lot of kind of people that are also kind of high achieving and hard on themselves. And I get to sort of, with the BIPOC clients, take a little bit of more risks and explore into them the history of their racialized experience that contributes to how they, like I name a lot of perfectionism in how they go about their job, or hyper independence, like we were just talking about. And there's some rich race-based stress and trauma conversations that we get to touch on that are underlying some of these surface level concerns that people put in the intake for therapy of, like, I want to work on my mood or anxiety or stress. I want to work on my perfectionism, but not with every BIPOC client. That's not what the pain point they're coming with. But and a lot of them, me representing my own, BIPOC identity and being clear about who I am and transparent. We're not a blank slate. Or I heard another guest on your podcast talk about the obvious, like we're not blank slates, and we're moving towards a more relational and identity transparent way of being with the client in the room. And I'm really happy to be excited and amped to kind of be a part of that. And being in my own private practice, I can show who I am and not have it harm clients, not have it complicate the dynamic. It actually enriches and is a vehicle towards collective healing. So that's kind of what I would say. And then I think that now that I've launched expanding my practice, I want to offer more non-clinical services. I'm trying to create more courses, digital downloads, handouts, resources that will be available to the public, because I know that it's hard to access therapy, or not everyone wants to. And so I'm, like I said, I'm really passionate still about science, and I want to represent that science doesn't have to be harmful and reductionistic and sterile and cold and all those things that it was kind of just associated with, and is in some ways. But we can make science attractive, science-based ways of self-assessing and governing our own change strategies or our own healing. We can use the good of science and the good of in our hearts to kind of combine forces. And I hope my products are going to be, very made with a lot of heart and integrity to the models that we know are effective for helping people achieve change in their biopsychosocial, psychospiritual worlds. So stay tuned for those. So I get to do a lot of stuff, and I think that's where I'm headed now, is sort of branching out into like offering things that can be outside the clinical space.
Well, I'm really excited that you launched your website and that we get to, see what resources are out there, because the way you talk passionately about bridging science and heart into the field is so critical, because there is an assumption that science is very reductionistic, or at least that's how it's practiced, as opposed to seeing it as, well, there's this anomaly and maybe getting rid of it. Why don't we study it and see what it can offer? Yeah.
And look at each person as its own humongous big data set. Like there's inside of our moment to moment, there's big data sets inside of each level of our experience, right? Our day to day, week to week, moment to moment, are what we're thinking versus what we're feeling. So there's so much rich data in each human that we can see ourselves, study ourselves, and also as flowing beings that change moment to moment.
Yeah. So Dr. Medina, you shared with us some of the challenges early on. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add relating to, in your career as a person of color, what were challenges that you faced and overcame that you would be willing to share?
There was just not a lot, in my postdoc at least, not a lot of support for women researchers. And I was a T32 at NIMH, which is a NIH-funded grant to be a postdoc for 2 years, along with some MDs and PhDs and MD PhDs. And we all had to present our research proposals. We were going to write a K award, which is a career development starter. I wrote my K, got very little feedback, got very, very little excitement for my topic, even though I was recruited to be there at Stanford for that topic. it was very disillusioning, and I'm sure it's all the combinations of there's implicit racism in the way that who got favored, whose research got attention, whose research also got taken seriously, and it was pretty demoralizing.
Yeah, I mean, there's papers out on this.
Yeah, right. That's the irony of it.
Yeah, there are papers out on this. Okay,
Yeah.
specific subject matter. So, with that, Dr. Medina, how do we support you?
How do you support me? Maybe I just launched my new website and center. It is an expansion from my kind of solo baby private practice that is, like I said, going to have just a little bit more expansion clinically. Maybe I'll launch a group soon or so, but also mainly in those products, courses, and digital downloads so that people can, I hope that little conversations around the kitchen table can be about psychology can become normal. That's the nerd I am. But check it out. It's at www.theprocessofchange.com. Someone else took the domain process of change by itself. So it's theprocessofchange.com. And you can see links to becoming a potential patient in my psychotherapy practice. And you can also look out for all those products and fun handouts that I mentioned. And I may also be taking a student intern. I had one who finished up, but I have a kind of a part-time internship for a student who wants to get to know kind of the ropes of just how a private practice runs and what happens. Not so much like an associate right now, not seeing patients or patient sessions, but sort of like the more aspects of helping me with some of my outreach and content creation, but also mentorship. It's a mentorship kind of I will give my mentorship, which I usually charge consultation fees for an exchange for something comparable for a few hours of work and helping me make this process of change thing happen. So that's kind of on the docket. I forgot to say something that's not as BIPOC related, but I think it's intersectionality related more. So breaking stereotypes and norms too. I always been into like punk rock music and metal music and kind of grunge music. And so I've always kind of felt that I'm always like in this box, but then like a part of me isn't, like it's not as common for like a Mexican girl to be listening to this punk rock music with all the white boys, but I am in LA now, and I'm also trying to kind of build an intersectionality niche where it's not just about your identity characteristics, but your interests and your passions. And so I want to look to help. I've started to help more artists and musicians and performers being in LA. So I want to expand that more because that is absolutely an underserved and ignored group in our interventions. There's so many musician overdoses, especially in my areas that I cover, anxiety and mood and addictions. How many of our great legends have overdosed or died early deaths? Like almost, all of them. And so I know that that's a need. I know that that's a niche I am passionate about supporting, whether BIPOC or not, but the fact that I'm BIPOC and I'm a big music fan and passionate about art. I did also an undergrad art major at Stanford, I mentioned that. So I've always been multifaceted. And so I really want to support multifaceted people too, and including kind of those brooding musicians and dreaming artists that I would love to have in my therapy room.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Dr. Medina, any final thoughts?
No, thank you so much for having me. This has been a really fun and great experience to chat with you.
All right. You take care.
Thanks.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you like what you've heard, please share and subscribe to our podcast, People of Color in Psychology. Other ways to support us include registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. We value your input and appreciate your continued support. You can send us an email, a message on LinkedIn, or send a voice message on our website. Until next time, I am your host, Jack Sun.